Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Get Jashed. I'm your host, Jess Jash. Today we are talking about the power of presence in fast-paced teams or fast-paced environments. Because look, I'm not trying to take your ambitions and your goals and all of the fast pace away from you unless you want that. But I know that many of us feel a sense of enjoyment with what we do, and some of us who might be, ADHD or anything like that, might have like several things on the go that looks like fast paced, and sometimes it is, but how do we navigate it and all of that kerfuffle. I'm not trying to take that away from you if you don't want that. If you love that, awesome, great. And I'm here serving as your friendly neighborhood reminder that presence is going to be key for you to continue enjoying this, for you to make it not just sustainable, but regenerative to your energy, rather than like rather than burning out like a flash in the pan, right? So we want to focus on how do we utilize our energy here in a way that regenerates itself rather than even just sustains itself, because sustains itself kind of to me, and look, I'm getting really picky with the wordplay here at the moment, but sustaining, while that is like we use that in a positive context in a lot of the times, like sustainable things are very good. And this is something that I've sort of learnt from different lectures I've been to throughout the year at positive psychology conferences over the course of this year. So it's kind of been percolating in the back of my brain, and I want to invite you into this as well, which is what if it wasn't just sustaining, which is kind of just, staying at the same level? And what if what we do is regenerative, which is some of you can't see my hand actions, but it's it's not just staying at the same level, where any little thing can upset that level. It's feeding itself. It's not feeding on itself, but it's feeding back into itself. It's giving itself more energy by doing this. And some of us feel that when we are doing more of the work that we love, that really fulfills us. This is the experience I have when I work with clients when we're really in the zone. I have a couple of one-on-one clients that I'm working with that will be in the zone on our sessions, in our calls, and I'll feel energized after. And obviously, there's a level there as well. Like I can't do that all day and feel the same, but there's this element of there's a regenerative energy from what we're doing. So with that perspective, I want us to look at fast-paced environments or fast-paced work. It's going to be hard to say 10 times fast, but these fast-paced areas that would normally feel good, but there is a risk of burning out, or like I see it like a shooting star, how it like burns bright and then it's like fades into obscurity. We want to look at how we can do that from a regenerative place. So that's where presence comes in. And from a leadership perspective, presence is that skill that keeps ourselves grounded and keeps teams grounded and performing when everything else moves fast, whether it's meant to or not, whether we choose the fast or not, right? We want to still be able and capable of staying grounded and performing in that case. I feel like I always have to have a caveat at the beginning of these because there's obviously a very specific angle we're looking at today. This isn't going to um, be appropriate in every environment where it is just burnout, where it's just chronic, like overwork. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the ones that are just like, this is my gem, this is where I thrive. Woohoo, let's fucking go. So in environments where it's not about like slowing the pace, it's not about, sometimes you need to have that pace. Sometimes that's what's interesting to you. Sometimes, I don't know, maybe you're a trauma surgeon or an ER doctor and or nurse and you need to be able to function at a pace, especially without burning out. And we know that the rate of burnout for our healthcare professionals is extremely high. So this isn't going to be like a solution for everything, but we're not talking about slowing the pace, especially in environments where we can't. We are talking about stabilizing your focus, your attention, your energy, grounding it in a bit like an like electrical conduit. I'm not an electrician, but grounding it in so you are creating regenerative energy. And then if you're a leader, your team or the people around you, even if that's you as a family, right? The people around you can align with that and work with that too. So this I didn't realize until I started speaking, I didn't realize how funnily enough, energized I would feel by talking about this topic because I just didn't realize because I spend a lot of time talking about like how do we soothe, how do we calm, oh, all nice things, but also the realistically, I spend a lot of my days in some kind of not necessarily fast pace, like I am not the aforementioned trauma surgeon, but I do spend a lot of my days or weeks with a lot happening, like just out of choice, inadvertently, sometimes like this at the beginning of this year, let's say, I knew that I had consciously chosen to submit for and then subsequently get accepted for a book proposal. So I knew that I was consciously choosing to write a book with a deadline, as well as continue studying my master's degree, as well as run my business and work with clients that I love and work that I love. Three very big things. I consciously knew that I was choosing to do all of these things at once. And at the beginning of the year, I made some changes that were necessary for several reasons. And one of them was I can't do everything at once. And there are some things that I need to let go of to be able to do the things that fulfill me, that energize me, right? That give me that regenerative energy. And then, you know, then life has things that it will throw at you. And it has been arguably, no, not even arguably, definitively, it has been the most personally disruptive year that I think I've ever had. And not in ways that in none of the ways that I chose, in addition to the things I did choose, like the disruption weren't in ways that I chose, only partly in ways that I expected or semi-expected, and yet the outcome was, or has been that I'm navigating all of it, the things I've chosen, as well as the things that have just presented. And that is sometimes how life happens for us. And we're going to have days where, oh, sorry, yes, days, but we're going to have years where it's not as intense and we get to just kick the goals and everything like runs a lot smoother. And then as it turns out, let me tell you, we're going to have years that we are still working towards the goals because I like having a goal. I like having ambition and I like being ambitious and I like working towards something that I've chosen. But we're going to also have years where we might still be doing that, but the disruption comes from elsewhere. And and then we just have to figure out how we navigate that depending on the scenario, right? So this isn't about necessarily having to do it all. Just in some circumstances, you just kind of have to because there is no other choice. It's just, it is what it is. But when we consider that we are experiencing and moving through our days at work, especially at speeds our nervous systems were never designed for. And I mean that in the conglomeration of everything. Like we're getting news at amounts, not just frequencies, amounts that our nervous systems were not designed for. Um, let's all take a big sigh there. We're not going to get too heavy on that. It's just going to be there. But, we're getting news at amounts. There is a lot of fuckery going on. We in Australia, we wake up every morning knowing that half the world has been awake, and that's largely where a lot of the fuckery is happening elsewhere. Um, so we wake up expecting, like, just kind of having to go, all right, what did we miss? And lately, most of the time, it's like it's big things. It's fucked things, right? So we have all of this experience, and that's just one thing. Then we have our work lives, we have emails, we have all of this experience at a speed and an amount that our nervous systems were never designed for. Constant notifications or the feelings of notifications. And I have a big opinion on that. It's not a hot take at all. It's just a strong stance. But we have constant notifications, we have emails, we have whatever we have, right? We have shifting priorities or shifting goalposts. People will the goalposts will move on us. For me, this year, that is a big example. Some of the goalposts have stayed the same, and some have just entirely disrupted the plan. So I've had to create a whole new plan and then try and get everything else to catch up with that so I can actually step into the plan. We have people waiting for decisions. We have following up people to make decisions when they said they've made a decision. We have all of these things. And how we navigate, how we lead others through that, how we navigate that ourselves and how we lead others through that will then be the contagion upon which they take on. I don't know if I said that right. How we navigate, how we lead ourselves through that, and then how we lead others through that is the contagion in which others will catch. Right? So, how we do that is how other people are going to learn or feel about doing that. One note on the constant notifications, because I see this online all the time. It's a sidebar. You get to choose whether you have certain notifications on. So I like my smartwatch because it means that I don't have to have my phone necessarily like attached to me or, like on loud and worry if I've missed something, like and constantly feeling like I have to keep checking it because I can just see like a little red dot if I have a notification there waiting or not. And I also choose not to have email notifications come through to my watch. I'm not going to do that. That's too much. There's certain things you can switch off, and you can also switch off. Like when I was employed, I made this very well known. I let them know that yes, I was logged in on apps like, on Teams or whatever if I needed to access to it. If I was traveling for a work event, it made it easy, like on the go. But I also made it clear that I didn't have notifications on that. It required me going in to see. So it was an intentional act. And that was intentional because I don't need that. Especially, so we don't need that, right? So I just want to say you're in charge of that. If you have a problem with someone emailing you late at night or messaging you late at night, you turn notifications off for that. Let others do their thing, you do your thing. All right, end sidebar. So, what does it look like to bring presence into fast-paced teams or days or roles? And why or how can that be the real performance advantage for you? That's really what we're exploring today. We're going to learn presence as attention. Regulation, remembering regulation isn't the goal, like not to stay perfectly regulated, but it's the ability to move, like to be in the act of regulating ourselves, and relational stability. So, what does presence mean? Because when I speak to groups, especially if it's sort of more like a one-off sort of session rather than a deep training session where we get to go into actual definitions, when I speak to groups and I use the word present or grounded, I do worry sometimes that because it is wording that I am so familiar with and that is so much part of my lexicon, that's so much part of my vernacular and my bones and my spirit. I do sometimes wonder if the real meaning of that is coming across or if it's just like a buzzword, right? So presence, to move it away from buzzword, even if you could possibly define it, move it away from buzzword, presence is full attention without fragmentation, being here now, not in what my coach would call like the painful past or the anxious future, just being here now. And the active presence, and this is something I've shared with everyone I've facilitated for, but particularly with soldiers, to really give them a grasp on the the how to, because they are such an active group, I guess, in that way. So the how to is not just, the goal is not to set and forget, I'm present, here I am. The practice of presence is noticing, is almost the inverse. It's noticing when you're not present and then bringing yourself back to present again. Noticing when your mind wanders and bringing it back again. If you're like me and have multiple mental tabs open at all times, this is an important practice. It doesn't mean about perfecting it at all. I don't know if I've ever perfected it. I've had moments and experiences, and that's enough because that has created enough space for, clarity in whatever way I needed. But the practice of presence is literally almost just noticing when you're not present and bringing yourself back to the present, right? So it feels almost counterintuitive, but here we are. What it is not is the absence of busyness. So, like I said, it doesn't matter if your mind is busy, you can still be practicing presence because you notice each time it's busy. It doesn't matter how many times you need to do that. You need to, it doesn't matter how many times you catch your mind going, I'm elsewhere. Oh no, it doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It means you've noticed, which is you doing it right, and then bringing it back to the present. So it's not the absence of busyness and then in the manifestation of what that looks like in the world around us, like in our day to day, in our work life, in our environment, physically, literally in our environment. It's not the absence of busyness. It is the capacity to practice staying with what matters most or bringing yourself back to what matters most as many times as you need to, even when things move quickly. I I always I haven't tested this professionally, right? I don't, or academically, like I haven't tested this, but I've always had this theory that I'm good in a crisis because I can, and it has to be someone else's crisis, but like I can, oh, my own too. I can respond and choose in the moment, and then I'll like have my breakdown later, and that's come to be expected. And I've had a few instances in the last few years that where I have been required to test that theory. And one was someone else's vehicle accident. And before I knew, before I had cognized what was happening, I was on the phone to 000. I was like really present. And then once I sort of caught up with what the fuck is happening, I then used my tools to stay present to navigate through the crisis. So that was an example. And there have been other examples this year that we don't need to get into, but it's the capacity to move, to stay with what matters most, even when things move quickly. Different people are going to have different temperaments to this, and I'm not saying one is better than the other, but it's just like saying some people are better suited to be first responders, for example, than not. And I'm kind of personally, I don't think I am. I think that would wear on me pretty quickly, but we're not talking, just to be really clear, we're not talking about the chronicness of this. It is about how do we respond when it does come up. So there's a lot of mindfulness and attentional control research. So I've shared a lot of mindfulness over the course of these 181 episodes. Daniel Goleman's focused leadership framework and Ellen Langer's work on mindfulness, like active noticing, might be something that you want to explore and look into if you want to nerd out a little about it. But really, presence is the anchor for us to experience clarity, emotional regulation, and to communicate effectively through it. Whether it is a chaotic moment, where it is an emergency moment, or whether it is just we are very busy and this is all the stuff we have going on. And if we simplify it and remove emergency, out of this, leaders are often still very busy. There's a lot of different things they have to be aware of, and you've got to learn, and it is a learning how to communicate effectively through that so that your team is clear and not from a place of you being emotionally dysregulated, because then your team is unhealthy too, but your team is clear so then everyone can actually go forth and do their jobs, right? So in fast-paced teams and in fast-moving environments, presence will naturally create, sorry, not presence, yes, presence will naturally create a groundedness and a connectedness, whereas fast-moving environments naturally have a tendency towards fragmentation, right? So like our attention will splay or splinter. Our communication becomes more reactive because I mean, parents with kids, I still don't know how you do it, but who's ever been trying to do one thing and then something else is not necessarily yelling at you, but trying to get your attention over here and you're just like, what? Right? This is the example, and we can't be perfect at it ever. Definitely not all the time, definitely not ever. But in fast-moving environments or in like lots of spinning plates environments, our attention is spliced between multiple things. Our communication is more reactive. And like I said, that contagion, that how we respond, how we navigate, that emotional and mental contagion in terms of that, that's where it spreads. And I've said it, I say it, I live by it. Everything I do is taught by it. But leaders set the emotional tone of a team. Look, leaders, you have a responsibility to your team, but I do want you to remember, and I just want to give you like a little exhale for a moment. You are also not responsible for how everyone in your team does respond if you are showing up responsibly to them, right? So some people have their own work to do, but you still have a responsibility to show up. We all, I think, as part of community and society, in any way, we all have a responsibility to show up as best we possibly can, even if that's not always the best. How do we repair from that? But leaders set the emotional tone of a team. When you are regulated or when you practice regulation, right? When you practice these tools and practice presence, it creates safety. So others feel safe and they're able to think more clearly. And that makes a difference If you want to bring it into psychosocial safety, this is what that is. You cannot, especially if you are in a state or country that has legislation about psychosocial safety, you cannot create psychosocial safety if you're reactive as shit and not working on that. You just can't. Like it makes people feel on edge and it risks their psychosocial safety. But others do feel safe and think more clearly around people who are more regulated or practicing these regulation and presence tools. So presence allows you to respond instead of react. That's really important because how often do we have an initial impulse or reaction, whether we acted on it or not, how often is our initial reaction not actually going to be useful for the outcome that we want or that is useful? Even if it's not the outcome we want, it has to be the outcome we have to have. Our reactions are not always the most useful for the outcomes that we need. Because while sometimes it might feel really satisfying to, I don't know, tell that person what you're really thinking, but then you still need something from them, or you still need to work alongside them, or you still need to have this trust, or you still need to whatever, right? So that's one. Obviously, any like physical response, like violence, is a reaction that is not useful or okay, but is not useful even if you're just like, oh, I'm just so angry. So presence gives you space to respond in a way that is more aligned with your values and your actual desired outcome. Presence allows you to hold multiple perspective without losing focus, especially when it does come to your values, your ethics, but you can hold multiple perspectives, even if that's very literally sitting in a room with people getting those multiple perspectives. Your presence means you're not just going to run off and be as influenced just because someone's speaking with passion versus someone who might be speaking very calmly but be telling like very factual things. I'm thinking of politics here too. Certain politicians are really, really good at getting like an emotional response based on nonsense. And when you're a leader practicing presence, you're able to, like a leader of yourself, even, right? If you're a constituent, which means you're a leader of yourself, practicing presence, you are more able to hold the multiple perspectives being spoken at you in this case, uh, and see through the emotional response or manipulation of it, and look at just the facts and see the perspectives. So it allows you to have perspectives. Presence allows you to listen deeply to your team or your people's needs, not just their words. Again, their needs. This is similar, same, but different to that previous point. But really, it's really listening deeply to, oh, what are they actually saying they need? Not because they might be in a reaction, because we're all human, we do react. And if they're in a reaction, sometimes as leaders, if we just take people for their words when they're reacting, we are not able to lead as effectively when we could actually just pay attention to their needs, right? So this helps us to help ourselves and help others better. And presence, this version and this practice of presence really specifically speaks to, so with the PERMA model, the engagement and the relationships part of the PERMA model in positive psychology. So that really allows us to be in positive engagement and relationship with people and really, really fill up those experiences. It can help prevent escalation, or it can help you respond to someone else's escalation. I've given examples of this before, but there are moments where my my body has literally kicked in with breathing before I knew something was happening. And because of that, I was able to respond to something very wrong that was ethically wrong that was said. I was able to respond because even I was having a reaction, my voice was shaking. I was younger. Um, so, you know, I wasn't as practiced in conflict as I am now, but my voice was shaking, but I was still able to say what was necessary to prevent the escalation of something unethical, even through a reaction. So notice it's not about like dampening any reaction. Sometimes it's a very normal response, a very reasonable response. But this is where it's really, really helpful to help you navigate. It's helpful if you need to respond in an emergency situation, or if you need to take a family member or a pet who is also a family member, to emergency. You're able to respond and navigate through that, even though you're probably understandably having a reaction. So presence is that practice of regulation with the plus the practice of attention, plus the practice of awareness. And we know that mindfulness and attentional practices strengthen the prefrontal cortex of the brain and reduce amygdala activation. So that means that there's less reactivity there and more clarity through the, what might be the red zone, or the the stress, the busy, right? So it does impact in neuroscience, it does impact our brain. Mindfulness and attentional practices like presence do strengthen areas of our brain and help us to train our brain in this way. It is quite literally brain training. So if you feel like you need what am I doing here? What's the action I'm taking? Take that. It's brain training. Physiologically, presence can signal safety. So it can help you feel safer in your body. Polyvagal theory speaks to this. So the mindfulness and presence, so mindfulness and attentional practices again, can help to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. So there are different practices that I teach and facilitate that are specifically created to do this in the body through the practices itself. So there are different ways through, whether it's eye rest or things like restorative yoga or any yoga or meditation or like guided meditation, body rotations, body scans, breath sensing. These help to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is simply put, the calming side of the nervous system. So that can help to create a sense of safety. So imagine what that can do. And I'm not saying you're going to your team and be like, all right, now we're going to like meditate. But imagine when you are practicing that flow-on effect, that ripple effect, imagine what that can do for your team or for the people around you. Anyone around you, literally anyone around you, because teams will mirror their leader's nervous system, their manager's nervous system, their like families will mirror each other's nervous systems. We're not getting into family systems today, it's too big, but like they will mirror the nervous system of the person they perceive to be the leader. So when you are grounded, practicing presence, your team is more able to synchronize with that around that around that steadiness, which is that co-regulation. So in leadership, here are a couple of ways that it can show up. Presence can show up in little micro movements. Pausing before answering. So there's several reasons for this. One really tangible way that this actually builds trust that I always use as an example because it's so tangible is if someone is asking you something and you have taken a moment, you've paused, maybe you've taken a breath, you've literally actually visibly considered it, even if your answer is no or whatever the person like, even if it's the answer the person doesn't want to hear, that builds more trust because they at least can see that you at least considered it. You became present and considered it, and that builds more trust, even if they didn't get the answer that they wanted. So, pausing before responding or answering is really, really helpful, but it also just sets a good precedent that we don't need to be flying off the fucking handle all the time. We don't need to be reactive all the time. We get to be more curious. We get to create space to ask a question, even if we have a reaction. We have all worked around people that either create that reaction in us, like, or provoke that reaction in us, I should say, sometimes intentionally, or they are very reactive. So presence can be that pause before we respond. It can show up as, look, some people say like eye contact, but also some of us struggle with eye contact, and I don't think that should be. This is where there is not a failing, but a gap in um, flourishing in positive psychology, because one of the markers of flourishing is how well do you make eye contact with people or socialize, and I don't know, I can just speak for myself, but us autistic people love people, but also it shows up differently and doesn't mean we're not flourishing. So it could be looking someone in the eye, but it could be just showing in whatever way that you are present with them. If it's not eye contact when they are speaking, it is, maybe it shows up in like body responses, like mirroring or just stillness and turning your position to them in some way, or nodding when they say something. Like, is other signals that show that you are present when they are speaking and you're paying attention. Presence as a leader, as for anyone, but as a leader, giving your full attention in meetings. And by that, I mean not on your fucking phone multitasking while someone else is trying to deliver something or talk about something that you as a leader have probably asked them to talk about. So giving your full attention, not being like, I'm just, yeah, 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 you can take notes, but make it like your full attention. And presence is also checking in with your tone and your body before you deliver feedback. That is just one of the jobs of being a leader. That is just one of the jobs of being a leader, is we need to pay attention to how our tone is and the words we say and even our body language in some way, especially when we are giving feedback. It's just one of our jobs as a leader to do. It is just our responsibility to check in on. We're not going to get it right all the time. We're going to slip because we're human. And again, we just try our best and we come back and we do that. We try. We just keep trying. So that is one. And and this allows you to really cultivate more emotional intelligence in this way. And I call the work I do with leaders and teams embodied leadership. And that's because we are including embodiment skills like this. And this, what we're talking about, is embodied communication. Your team feels your attention and your calm or your groundedness, even if it's not calm, your groundedness, your steadiness, more than they hear your words. All right, so a couple of things, a couple of practical ways. Those were some, but a couple of practical ways to build presence that you can practice, but maybe you want to introduce in some way, as long as you are practicing it too. Don't introduce this and make it things that other people need to do that you're not doing yourself. You need to lead this. As a leader, you need to lead this. So you can do any attention reset rituals. So before meetings, any transition moment in your day, actually, I like this for. But before meetings, pause for one full breath before you go into the room, the Zoom room or otherwise, before you just take a deep breath. I do this when I'm at the beach just because it's nature and I love it. Like if I'm looking out at a view and I'm there and I'm about to go, I make sure that I don't move, like I don't get up and leave until I've taken 10 conscious breaths where I'm just present, right? So attention reset rituals. Pause for a full breath in a transition moment before something. Ask yourself what matters most right now. Go in with that intention of focus. What matters most right now? Presence practices for teams. You can do a 30-second ground in, like a grounding check-in rather, before meetings. That is really, really helpful. It doesn't have to be hippy dippy woo woo. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be vague. It can just be all right, we're just taking a breath in, out, maybe noticing your body connecting to the chair beneath you, your clothes on your skin, your feet on the ground, or whatever it is, right? Make it inclusive depending on who's in there, but just this grounding check-in. Um, uh, Normalize no notification focus blocks, like time blocking in your calendar, or just the expectation in some way of normalizing and making it okay for everyone, not just you, but for everyone to be like, all right, I'm in no notification time. I'm on do not disturb. I'm in deep focus. And then I really like the reflection moments each week. So whether it's the end of the week or, like when you come back around to your weekly team meeting or whatever it is going, what went well? What did we learn? What's the honorable mention? I really like that. I think it's really useful because it keeps people focused, but it also gets them to reflect rather like, and then learn from that. Um, when it comes to reaction, use sensory cues practices to stay embodied. So if you start to feel reactive or if something has happened that you think is probably reactive, just notice your senses, all of them, your breath, your posture, sound if you have hearing, um, like temperature. I was going to say air texture, and I think I meant humidity, just because it's humid here. But things like that, sensory cues. And where possible, delay your responses when you're emotionally charged. Where possible. Sometimes that's just not going to be possible. Sometimes the event is happening, requires a response, but it is naturally emotionally charging you. So delay your response or do these other things first. So even that slight delay until you ground in and embody in. And use these practices of presence almost like as a culture, right? We miss out on so much culture because it has become ridiculously so divisive. And really, if we use presence, if we create it as part of our culture, you model what you want to see. You are focusing, you are listening, you are being curious, you are repairing when you make a mistake, because we all will. You're in recovery, right? Like you are modeling, You're encouraging downtime, like that permission for anyone's individual version of quiet thinking, quiet zone, in the zone, whatever that is. You encourage this. This is a culture shift internally. And culture doesn't happen in a silo. It doesn't happen with just one person, but you are encouraging it. So here is your those are the things you can do. Here's what you can reflect on, over the next week, whenever you listen to this. How often are you truly present when you're leading your team? And don't make yourself wrong, right? Don't get like shitty or down on yourself, but just check in. How often, like reality check, just to check, how often are you truly present when you're leading your team? Once you've acknowledged, and it might not be an answer that pleases you, and that is okay. Next question is, how could that presence shift the energy of your next conversation or your next thing you have to do? How could presence shift the energy of the activity? So remember, presence is not a passive thing. It's not just to sit back, do nothing. It is active, it is stabilizing, it is grounding, it is a force that amplifies performance, the clarity that people feel, the understanding, the comprehension they have, the connection they have with each other, that regenerative energy that they have, that you have, it amplifies all of this. It's not passive, it's not soft. It amplifies what you want to amplify. So if this episode landed with you, take these practices, really put them into place. I work one-on-one with leaders and business owners to help them with this, because sometimes we listen and we feel good and then we don't really follow through because we're human. But also share this episode with someone who leads at pace as well, who is in that fast pace. Presence needs to not be treated like a luxury like economy anymore, and more as a necessity. It is a leadership skill that keeps everything else working, and it is a skill that is buildable and needs to be built. It doesn't happen on its own. It needs to be built. And there are ways you can do it depending on your industry, your interest in well-being or not, right? There are ways you can do it in a way that works for you and your context. So God, that was a long one, but that's all I have for you today, I think. I hope this has been useful. But yeah, share this. Um, Leave a review if you enjoy this. That would be really, really helpful, because the more this is shared, the more people the algorithm favors, sharing these episodes, this podcast with other people who don't have a direct, degree of separation with it. So that would be really helpful, not just for me, but potentially for other people. Otherwise, be well, be present as best you can, and until next time.